Yahweh versus the satanic Philistine gods is the portion of what we're going at here. We're looking at Yahweh versus the Philistines. All the pagan nations, I keep saying this, but I keep saying it in different ways. You got to get this in your head and understand it. The simple fact is God created man to worship Him. We are worship beings. But when Adam fell and walked away from God through sin, man no longer worshiped God, at least not for the moment, and found other things to worship. Men are made to worship. We will, and women, I mean mankind, we will worship something. We are built to worship something, whether it's a higher power, whether it's a God, whether it's ourselves, whether it's a political movement, whatever we give our time to, we will worship something. It's how we're built. He built us to worship Him. And when men fell away from Him, they stopped worshiping God and chose all these false gods. Satan knows that men were made to worship. Satan knows that God is the only God. And so Satan knows that if I can only produce these counterfeit gods, I can get people's eyes off of the worship of Yahweh and onto the worship of all these false gods. And that's exactly what he's done. All the pagan nations worshipped a false god. There were no atheists. Listen to me. That's a new thing. There were no atheists in the world in which the Old Testament was written. These people worshiped something. They either worshiped Yahweh, the true God that we know, or they worshiped false gods. But all these people were worshiping something. It was common to make animal sacrifices. That wasn't something that was peculiar to the Jews. Everybody was sacrificing animals. The crazy pagans were sacrificing their children to their false gods. Everybody was making blood sacrifices, animal sacrifices to their false gods. I'm trying to tell you that wasn't abnormal for Israel to have that practice in the worship of God. Everybody was doing it. They cheated. They stole from Adam and Eve and the death of the animal that covered their sin. They saw that, and men and Satan came up with all these counterfeit ways to worship false gods. Satan is in the counterfeit business. He's a liar. And he doesn't want you to have a relationship with the God who hates him. He wants to take us with Him. He wants us to be in hell with Him. He wants our eyes off of God. He's a liar and a hater of humans. And so he has developed all these false gods, these systems of false gods for all the pagan nations. They were supplied by Satan. All over the world, still today supplied by Satan. And that's what we're focusing on here, that Satan has a counterfeit for every one of God's truths. The truth we're looking at, the promise is from the book of Isaiah, where God says, I am Yahweh, I am God, and I know of no other. There is no other God besides me. I've shown you verse after verse in the book of Isaiah where God promises us that there is one Creator, one God, one eternal being, and it's Yahweh, the God of Israel. There never has been another one. There never will be another one. Only Yahweh is God, and that's what we're focusing on, the fact that Satan comes in and says, oh, no, nations, you can worship a multitude of gods. Let me present them to you. And Satan has these false god systems built. He uses men to build them. And that's where we've gone. That's why we've gone through these things. I told you, when Israel was in Egypt for 400 years, the Egyptians had many gods supplied to them by Satan. That's what the 10 plagues were about. God, Yahweh, knocking down the major, the most or the highest 10 gods of Egypt. He says that. I'm waging war against the gods of Egypt. So Satan had all these Egyptian gods ready. Here, Jews, here, world, worship these gods. Forget about Yahweh. You can worship any god you want. There are many gods. Even though Satan knows well and good that there is only one God. If anybody knows it, Satan knows it. But he lies to us and tells mankind there are multiple gods. So in Egypt we saw the multiple gods. Israel finally leaves Egypt. We know the story. And Israel, remembering the idolatry of Egypt, they made a false god for themselves at the base of Mount Sinai, this golden calf. Remember, Aaron took the earrings and he chisels out this golden calf for Israel, says, this is your God. This is the God who brought you out of Egypt. So remembering Satan's false Egyptian gods, the Jews go into the wilderness and build their own God. As Israel, later in the story, as they approach the border of the Promised Land, Satan is there. He's in the land of Moab, and he offers the Egyptian or the Israeli men the Moabite women. He wants to lure the Egyptian men with the pretty Moabite women because he knows that the men will start to worship the gods that the women worship. The bad apple will spoil the bunch. So as Israel approached the border of the Promised Land, where's Satan? He's there with his counterfeit false gods. Satan had Baal Peor, that was the god's name, the false god of the Moabites, ready to lure the Jewish men into idolatry. He tried to get them in Egypt to become idolaters. It worked because when they left Egypt, they were idolaters and they made this golden calf. They're on their way to the Promised Land. They don't even get into the Promised Land yet, and they're showing their idolatrous nature by going with the Moabite women and worshiping Baal Peor. Because Satan is always ready with a counterfeit. When Israel entered the Promised Land finally, Satan had the Canaanite gods waiting for them. Baal, Asherah, I could go on and on with all the names of the false gods that Satan had. Not Egyptian names, but now Canaanite names, for the same series of false gods, the god of fertility, the god of the sun, the god of the crops, the god of rain, the god of war, a goddess of love. All the same gods, just by different names. Satan had them in Canaan, ready for Israel. And now here we are with the story of David and Goliath, the Philistine, who worships his own national god. He worships another satanic false god. Dagon is this god's name, and he's the national god of Philistia. So we always see through the pages of the Scripture the one true God fighting Satan, who's trying to fool mankind into thinking you don't have to worship Yahweh. You can worship one of a multitude of gods that I can offer you. And men are so foolish, they fall for it. They just fall for it generation after generation, don't they? They fall for the counterfeits. We're still living in it today where there are counterfeit systems. I'll say something that may be controversial. Church. I hesitate to give too many church names, but let me say this. If a church, I don't care what denomination, I don't care if they're Jewish or Christian or whatever they claim to be, if there is a congregation that calls themselves church that does not teach that God is three persons in one God, if that church doesn't teach Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, if that church doesn't teach that the second person of the Godhead, God the Son, came to earth and took on humanity in the person of Jesus Christ to die for the sins of every human that's ever lived, if that church doesn't teach that, they are a satanic counterfeit. Period. You got to have the right God. You got to have fallen mankind. You have to have sinners because that's who we are. And you have to have the Savior in the person of Jesus Christ. If a church has all that right, but they teach you don't only have to believe in Jesus Christ, but you also have to do these extra things, and when you perform these extra things, then you are saved, then I would offer to you that church is of their father, the devil. So we say, well, who are the Moabite gods? What's the example of Dagon in our day? Again, I'm not going to say the name of a church, but you know well enough to know that there are churches that don't teach the triune God. There are churches that don't teach that Jesus is the Savior. There are churches that don't teach that faith only in Jesus is what saves. And all of those churches, by whatever name, are worshiping Baal Peor, they're worshiping Asherah, they're worshiping Milcom, they're worshiping Molech, they're worshiping all of these false gods of Satan. I don't care by what name it's called. Satanic counterfeits. Amen? I don't care what the name on the building is. I don't care how many millions in the world they have. I don't care how pretty the church building is. I don't care how flowing the robe is. I don't care how much money the church has. If they're not teaching biblical truth, they are satanic counterfeits. And foolish men can't get this. Unfortunately, Satan is always ready with the counterfeit. So here we are again, David versus Goliath, and the backdrop here that I want you to see while we go into the rest of the story is Yahweh and Yahweh's man for the job, David, and Satan's man for the job, Goliath. That's what's going on here. Goliath is taunting the God of David. Goliath, we'll see in just a minute, says, "What am I, a dog that you come with me with sticks? You come at me with sticks with this little junk you have in your hand? I am the mighty Goliath." There it went. But you come at me as if I'm a dog, like you're not fighting me, this man that you see in front of me, like you're trying to discipline a dog with your little rocks and your sticks and your sling. And he taunts him based on David's gods, the scripture says. I'll show it to you in just a minute. This is a holy war between two people. David fighting for Yahweh, who says, "Yahweh, He was with me when I fought the lion, when I fought the bear. Yahweh will give me victory. He will avenge Israel. He will knock down this Philistine. I don't care how big he is." Because God is the God of Israel. He's the one true creator God. And this man is taunting the living God. And the living God will defeat this man's God, Dagon. Watch it happen. That was David's attitude going into this fight. I stand for the living God, and that man stands for a satanic counterfeit, and there is no way I'm not winning today. No way. Because Yahweh is the one true God. That's the backdrop. That's David's heart here. So Goliath is depending on his God, Dagon, to protect him. And David is relying on Yahweh to protect him. Who's going to win that? The real God or the nothing, the non-existent God? But make no mistake, Goliath is relying on the national God of his country, Philistia, to save him, to give him a victory over this Jewish boy, David. He's counting on his God's protection, and he's counting on his belief that his God can overpower David's God. That's what we're talking about here. This isn't just a story of a young shepherd boy with a sling and a stone. This is the real God versus Satan's false gods. That's what's going on here. That's the backdrop to the story. Let's pick it up in verse 8 just to read a couple verses. I am in, where am I? Anybody remember? 1 Samuel chapter 17. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Just to pick up the story so we know where we're at, Goliath challenges the Israeli army. Goliath, this 9-foot, 9-inch tall giant, it says he stood and he shouted to the ranks of Israel, and he said to them, "Why do you come to draw up in battle array? Am I not the Philistine, and you servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. For 40 days, in the morning and in the evening, for 40 days, Goliath, the giant Philistine, would come out and taunt the Israeli army. Send me one man. If he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will become your servants." All of the Philistines will become the servants of Israel if you can provide a man to beat me in battle. But, he says, if I prevail against the Jew and kill him, then you shall become our servants and serve us. For 40 days he did this. And then we see Jesse, David's father, out of concern for his 3 oldest sons who were on the battlefield, Jesse sends his youngest son David to take a care package to his oldest 3 sons and to find out how they're doing. And so David takes this care package. David shows up at the battlefield on the front lines of battle. Look at what it says down in verse 26. Then David spoke to the men. He hears the Goliath, he hears the giant give the taunt. Send me one man. If we win, you'll be our servants, etc. David hears it, and David wants more information. In verse 26, David spoke to the men who were standing by him, and he said, what will be done for the man, the Jewish man, who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? How dare this man talk about the children of the living God? I need to take away the reproach from him. Somebody tell me what is going to be my future. What is David obviously thinking? I'll take this guy on. I don't care who he is. I'm standing for the living God. So David wants to know what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine. He says, for who is this uncircumcised Philistine? He's not part of the Jewish nation. He's not a worshiper of Yahweh. Who is he? Who does he think he is that he should taunt the armies of the living God? Not the dead God, Dagon, the living, the ever-present and living God. David understands exactly what the fight is. God versus Satan, the real God versus the false God. He gets it immediately. This uncircumcised Philistine is taunting not Israel, they're taunting the armies of Yahweh, and that's where they need to be careful. The people answered David in accord with his word, and they said, thus it will be done for the man who kills him. Remember, you're going to live tax-free. You're going to marry one of the king's daughters. The king's going to make you a rich man. That's what they told David. In verse 28, this is where we have the jealous older brother Eliab. Now remember, we're going through in 1 Samuel chapter 16 in the first hour the fact that Samuel has been sent to Jesse's house to anoint the next king of Israel. I told you this morning, David's a little boy at that time. He's a 12-year-old kid. And Eliab is the first one. He's the oldest son. That's the man here now, Eliab, his older brother, or his oldest brother. It was Eliab who Samuel looked at and said, surely this is the Lord's anointed. And that's when God said, no, Samuel, you're looking at his outward appearance, but I look on a man's heart, and I have rejected him from being king. I'm telling you that because Eliab is in the presence of Samuel and Jesse and all his brothers when he is passed over as being king. He's the firstborn of a Jewish family. He should have the birthright. He should have a double portion of his father's inheritance. He is the king of that house. But not this house, because God would choose the youngest son, David. So Eliab has a chip on his shoulder. He's upset with his brother David. Probably hated him from that moment on 5 years ago when Samuel came and anointed David instead of him. So Eliab, it says here, his oldest brother, David's oldest brother, heard when David spoke to the men and asked the question, what will be done for the man who kills this uncircumcised Philistine? Eliab overhears David ask the question, and Eliab's anger burned against his little brother David, and he said, why have you come down? What are you even doing here? This is angry. It says his anger burned. So imagine the tone with which he is asking David these questions. With whom have you left those sheep in the wilderness? You're our father's shepherd. I bet you abandoned those sheep, you no good, worthless brother. But he didn't. We saw earlier that he found someone to tend to the sheep. And then Eliab says to David, I know your insolence. I know the wickedness of your heart. For you have come down in order to see the battle. So he doesn't like David. He doesn't want David there. He doesn't appreciate David's presence. He's jealous of David. Now he's angry at David. And all David was doing was obeying his father Jesse. Jesse's the one that sent him with the care package, the oils and the wafers, whatever he brought, and tried to find out what was going on with his 3 older brothers. But the oldest brother is angry with him for being there. He was jealous as the firstborn, the one who in his mind thought he should have been anointed king. If any of Jesse's sons are going to be anointed king, it should have been him. He's the firstborn son. But it wasn't like that. He also didn't want to look bad in front of his brother because, as I said, for 40 days, every morning and every night, Goliath would come out and make the challenge. And Eliab has not taken the challenge, has he? No one has stepped forward to fight the giant. So here David hears these words and he's looking at his brother like, what are you waiting on? Why haven't you jumped out in front of this uncircumcised Philistine and killed him already? So there is a lot of family strife here when David speaks up and says, what's going to happen to the man that kills him? Eliab takes this very personally, doesn't like it at all. Verse 29 says, but David said, what have I done now? You can imagine David has to put up with Eliab, his oldest brother, all the time. They must have a bad relationship. This isn't the first time Eliab's anger has burned against his little brother David. And David asks, what is it now? What is it that I have done to wrong you this time? This isn't the first time he's had to ask this question. Was it not just a question, David says? I'm just trying to find out facts here. Why are you chewing on me? Then David, that's all he says to his brother. He kind of dismisses him. And then David turned away from him to another Jewish soldier, and he said the same thing, and the people answered the same thing. He wants to know again. Tell me again. Now, my brother interrupted us in his anger and his jealousy, but tell me again, what is it that the king has promised to the man who kills this uncircumcised Philistine? And so they tell it again. So David goes to see Saul. When the words which David spoke were heard, obviously it was in David's heart, I can fight this Philistine. Saul found out about it, King Saul. When the words which David spoke were heard, they told them to Saul, and Saul sent for David. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail on account of Goliath. Why are we overly concerned about this uncircumcised Philistine? He says, let no man's heart fail on account of him. Your servant, speaking of himself in the third person, I will go and fight with this Philistine. So David says, let me be the one to conquer the giant. I have zero fear. Saul says to David, look, this 17-year-old boy, my son Caleb is 17. Well, he's 16, he'll be 17, but look at him. I don't know how big David was, but I think of Caleb, and I think of this 9-foot, 9-inch giant in all this armor. And if Caleb said, Dad, let me at him, I'd say, son, you're nuts. They're going to break you like a twig, babe. You can't fight that guy. And that's exactly what Saul said to David. How you're not able to go up against this Philistine. You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, 17-year-old boy, while he's been a warrior from his youth. This is an aged man, not aged in the sense of old, but this is a warrior, a battle-tested warrior, Goliath, who knows how many men he'd slayed by this time. And here this little 17-year-old, ruddy, little, handsome, beautiful-eyed boy wants to go fight the giant, and Saul tries to talk him out of it. How does David respond to Saul? David says to Saul, verse 34, your servant was tending his father's sheep. I am the shepherd of my father's sheep, and when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him. I rescued the sheep from the lion and the bear's mouth, and when he rose up against me, I seized him by his beard and struck him and killed him. Here's a man who has no fear. Isn't it interesting that God gives us all this information about David and David's character through this story of Goliath? We would never know of David's fearlessness, David's courage in a hard situation if not for statements like this. A lion and a bear David fought off with his hands. Why did he do that? Who is he trying to save? His father? His mother? A sheep. Just a sheep. Just a single ordinary dumb sheep. It shows of David's sacrificial heart, willing to give of himself, to put himself in an inconvenient, even dangerous, life-threatening situation for a sheep. Who better to shepherd Israel than a man who has a sacrificial heart? You can see a lot of Jesus Christ in King David. A sacrificial man willing to give his life, if that's what it took, to save one sheep. That was the heart of King David, a man whose heart was after his gods. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them. David has no doubt, none, that he will defeat Goliath. No doubt. I have already killed things that should have killed me. But by the grace of Yahweh, the God I serve, He allowed me to protect the sheep, and Goliath is nothing more than an impediment to God's plan. God will allow me to kill him. I have no fear of this uncircumcised, Yahweh-rejecting man. No fear. He says, your servants killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because God will act, because this Philistine has taunted the armies of Yahweh, the living God, and God will not be mocked. Do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. Know that verse? It's one you should write down. This man is mocking, Goliath is mocking the living God and his ability to protect and give the victory to this young David. And the scripture says, do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. Of course, I won't find it. Anybody know where it is? Don't go looking for it. I'll lose you. Oh, here I'm in the right verse. Galatians chapter 6, verse 7 says, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows or plants, that is what's going to come out of the ground. That he will also reap. You want to toy with somebody? You want to mock the living God? Prepare for battle. Prepare for battle. He will meet you on the battlefield. Goliath is about to find out. So we have this information about who David is through the master storyteller God, who gives us these visions into David's character, his fearlessness, his courage through this story. These little facts he's telling Saul. David, as we see here, is focused on his dependence on Yahweh for physical survival against the lion, against the bear, against this giant. It doesn't matter who. God will physically provide for me. He'll protect me. I will survive this. I will win. That's David's heart. Courageous man. A man after God's own heart. Verse 37 says this, and David said, continuing to speak to Saul, Yahweh, it was Yahweh who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear. It's Yahweh who will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. David is not presenting to Saul, listen, you have no idea, king, how good I am with a sling and a stone. You just haven't heard about me, I guess. I can sling this stone accurately and perfectly from whatever distance. I can kill this giant. He's not making any kind of a guarantee concerning his own abilities. What he's saying is, I worship the living God. This uncircumcised Philistine is taunting my God as if his gods are better, and I know that my God won't stand for that. I'll go into battle with this man, and I guarantee you my God Yahweh will defeat this man. You watch it happen. The Lord who delivered me from the lion and the bear, this Lord Yahweh will deliver me from the hand of the Philistines. Again, David is pleading with Saul and saying, I've already killed things that were mightier than me. I don't know whether I'd be more afraid of a 9-foot-tall man or a bear or a lion coming at me. I kind of think I'd be more afraid of the bear and the lion. But David had already conquered those two by the grace of God. He had no fear of this man. No fear, none whatsoever. Goliath, as it turns out, was just another predator. Listen to this statement. Like the lion and the bear were predators to the safety of the sheep, Goliath, as it turns out, was just another predator that was threatening the safety of Yahweh's flock, the people of Israel. And David knew that Yahweh would protect his flock the same way he protected David's sheep from the lion and the bear. Goliath is just another predator. Saul said to David, okay, Go, and may Yahweh be with you. So Saul gives in to David. In the next verses, quickly, Saul tries to make David in his image as a warrior. Remember, Saul is a big man, stands a head and shoulders above all the others. Broad shoulders, brawny, strong, handsome man. And Saul looks at the little David and tries to make David into what Saul is as a warrior. It doesn't work. Look what happens. In verse 38, Saul clothed David with his garments. Surely if you're going to go fight Goliath, you have to be armored. And so Saul tries to make David look like he did when he went into battle. Saul clothes David with his garments, put a bronze helmet on his head. He clothed him with armor. David girded Saul's sword over his armor, and he tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And so David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I have not tested them. And David took them off. All of this armor, the bronze, the helmet, the leg guards, all of this, what we would see as Roman attire covering this boy David. He tries to walk in it. He's clumsy. I'm sure he tried to lift up his arm because he knows how he's going to kill Goliath. He's a sling man. I'm sure he moved around and lifted up the arm and said, this is an impossibility for me. I can't go in all this garbage. I am not you, Saul. I'm not fighting as a warrior. I'm fighting as Yahweh's man for the job. I don't need all this junk. It's not been tested. I can't fight like you. I fight like me. And I have learned to use a sling, and that's how I'm going into battle. It says in verse 40, so he took his stick in his hand, his shepherd's staff. He's a shepherd. He would have a shepherd's staff. And he chose for himself, here are the examples of the stones. These stones, as I said, are from the valley of Elah. The picture is up there. That's the valley. That's the dry creek bed I got these stones from. And these are the stones from which David chose. Same place. That's the valley. That's where this battle took place. That photo on the screen there. So David takes and chooses for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook. Sometimes this is a brook during the rainy season. Water runs through there. And he put them in the shepherd's bag, which he had, even in his pouch. And his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. My sling fell down. Let me get it. If you weren't here when I explained the sling, it's just a very simple piece of leather held on by two ropes in this case. And the way David would have slung the stone is to put the stone in the sling, to hold on to both ends of it, to swing it very, very hard. The centrifugal force would hold the stone into the sling. And at the moment David wanted the rock to be loosed, David would release one of the lines. And that would open up the sling like this, and the next time around, that sling was on, or that rock was on its way down range, as we say in the gun world. And that's exactly how David killed Goliath, with a very simple, not armor, not a sword, not a knife, not any of the bronze helmet that Saul wanted him to wear. The shepherd boy had a sling that shepherds would use and a stone. This is how they kept the wolves away, the bears, the lions when they came, with slings like this. So David takes 5 stones from the brook, and he takes his sling with him, and he approached the Philistine. Verse 41 says, when the Philistine came on and approached David, this is Goliath the giant with his shield bearer in front of him. So he's coming with 2 people, not only himself, but some other little guy probably carrying his sword or another part of his armor. He's helping Goliath with all of Goliath's war implements. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him. That means to look. He looked at him with contempt. He disdained David, for he was but a youth and ruddy and with a handsome appearance. Imagine this little kid, who knows what he was wearing. I think I have a picture of David here with his sling. You'll notice how that sling is opened up there, you see. You have the leather pouch, you have the 2 pieces of leather, and he's let go of one piece of it. You can see it way up here, and that rock went and hit Goliath. There's his armor bearer. Valley of Elah, that's interesting. That's what it looked like. But anyway, the idea is here that when David was seen by Goliath, Goliath disdained David. This little guy, he could have been dressed like that in shepherd's gear. He was a shepherd after all. And here he is fighting Goliath in all of Goliath's armor. So Goliath says to him, "Am I a dog? You think you're coming out to fight a dog with your little stick?" And I mean, just imagine the furor in Goliath, who's a warrior and wants to fight to the death like gladiators do. He wants a fight. And this little kid comes out with a sling and a stone. And so he hates that. He says, "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" Referring to his little wooden staff. The Philistine cursed David by his gods. Now here's the crux of the problem. His refers to David. The Philistine is cursing David and using Yahweh's name in the cursing. Now there's a problem. He's been taunting the armies of the living God for 40 days, but now he says, "Your God cannot save you. You depend on Yahweh. You come to me with a sling and stones. You're depending on Yahweh. Your God cannot save you. My God will save me and kill you." That's what's going on here. He has just cursed David's God, Yahweh. And verse 44 says, "The Philistine also said to David, 'Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the sky and the beasts of the field.'" I don't mind killing you. Come on. The birds and the beasts of the field will feed on your dead body today. Now what Goliath has just done is threatened to kill God's man on the ground. He's cursed God himself. And he says, "I will destroy your son, God. You, Yahweh, are not strong enough to defeat me." And what we'll see is when you threaten to kill one of God's children, God will kill your children. You say, "Really? Wait, that's a strong statement. Where'd you get that from?" Where did I get that? Give me a story in the Bible where there was a group of people that say, when the Jewish women have a baby, drown them in the Nile River. Let's kill the Jewish sons. Let's drown them in water. When the Jewish women have a child, if it's a son, kill him in the Nile River. If it's a girl, let it live. And then later in the story, as that army of these people are chasing Israel at the Red Sea, what happens? Israel had threatened to kill the Jewish sons of God in water, and what ends up happening is the Egyptian army is drowned in what? In water in the Red Sea. Why is that? You threaten to kill my sons in water? I'll kill your sons in water. He's a perfectly fair God. What does the Bible say? An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You come at my boys with water, I'll pay you back the same way. It's only fair. Nothing else would have been fair. It's only fair. You drown my kids in water, you threaten to kill my children, I'll kill yours instead. You want to play this? We can play this. It's exactly what happens here. So Goliath tells David, "I will give your body to the birds of the field and the beasts of the field today, the birds of the sky." That's his charge to David. "You will die today. I'll break you like a twig." And David said to the Philistine, "You come at me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the Lord of the armies." Yahweh Sabaoth is what this is in Hebrew, and it means the Lord of the armies. You come against me with all this tactical weaponry. I'm coming at you with God himself. I come at you in the name of the Lord of hosts, Yahweh Sabaoth, the Lord of the armies, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have taunted. Again, do not be deceived. God will not be mocked. You cannot mock this God. This day, David says to Goliath, "This day Yahweh will deliver you up into my hands. I will strike you down and remove your head from you." Imagine what Goliath was thinking when this little boy is telling him this in his shepherd's robe. I will take you, I will kill you, I'll strike you down, I'll remove your head from you, and I'll give the dead. God will allow me, because you say you're going to give me to the birds and the beasts. I'm telling you that the God of the armies of Israel will give you into my hands and your entire army, and I will give the dead bodies of the army of the Philistines this day to the birds of the sky and the wild beasts of the earth. You want to kill me and feed me to the animals? God will see to it that you're the one that's killed and fed to the animals. Not only you, but you and your entire army. Remember Egypt. Remember the Red Sea would have been his cry, I can imagine. It's happened before Goliath. It's going to happen today. Why? The last phrase says it, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. There is one God, one Creator, and He is the God of Israel. He's the protector of Israel. And you're going to find out today you have taunted this God, and He's coming after you, son, and He's using me to do it. Very simple. There's no way David should have been able to defeat Goliath. No way. Except for the fact that God gave him this victory. No way in hand-to-hand combat could little David destroy this almost 10-foot-tall giant. So David's victory would prove that Yahweh was in fact fighting the battle, that Yahweh was on the battlefield, and that there was a God in Israel and His name is Yahweh. That's the idea there. Verse 47 says, and that all this assembly... David continues talking to Goliath. Not only will all the earth know that there's a God in heaven, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not deliver by sword or by spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and He will give you into our hands. We don't need superior weaponry. You say, I'm coming at you at sticks, and you have your javelin and your sword and all these things. We don't need superior weaponry when we have the God, the Creator God on our side. The weaponry is not important in this battle. Doesn't matter. Verse 48 says this, then it happened, when the Philistine rose and came and drew near to meet David, because the Philistine's ready to fight. You want to die, boy? I'll kill you today. When the Philistine came and rose and came and draw near to David, that David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine, not hiding behind anything. He's got his sling and he's got his stone. David put his hand into his bag and he took from it a stone. And he slung it. And he struck the Philistine on his forehead. And the stone sank into his forehead so that he fell on his face to the ground. The picture we have here is of the stone breaking Goliath's forehead, crushing the frontal lobe, the bone here, his skull, going into his frontal lobe of his brain and lodging in there. Who knows how deep it was in there, an inch, 2 inches. But that stone would have been traveling 100 plus miles an hour. It went right into this giant. He fell flat onto his face. Verse 50 says, thus David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone. It wasn't hand-to-hand combat. It wasn't this mortal combat. It was from a distance. It was a sling and a stone. He struck the Philistine and he killed him, but there was no sword in David's hand. It's not how God chose to fight this battle. Then David ran, imagine this, verse 51, then David ran and stood over the Philistine, and he took Goliath's sword. Imagine this scene. He took Goliath's sword, he drew it out of its sheath, and he killed Goliath with it, and he cut off his head with it. He used Goliath's sword to cut off Goliath's head. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. I bet they did. This is the strongest man in their army, and he's just been defeated by this boy in a rock. If God can do that, if their God Yahweh can do that to the strongest, mightiest warrior we have, we don't stand a chance against His whole army of men. If by one man and a sling and a stone, God can defeat, their God can defeat our God Dagon, We don't stand a chance in this battle. Their God is stronger than our God, is the picture here. And so they fled. The last two verses that we're going to cover are these. Verse 52, then the men of Israel and Judah arose and they shouted and they pursued or chased after the Philistines as far as the valley and to the gates of Ekron. So they're going back west. Ekron is a Philistine city. They're chasing the Philistines back into Philistia, and the slain Philistines, the dead ones, lay along the way to Sharaim and even to Gath and Ekron, 2 more cities of the Philistines. The Jews are chasing the Philistines and killing them while they're chasing them, and all the dead Philistine soldiers are laying all along the roadway, the path that they took between these 2 cities. And then after that, what do you think is going to come? When there are dead bodies of men all over the ground, what's going to show up? The birds of the sky and the beasts of the field. David said, on this day, because you taunt the armies of the living God Yahweh, and you say you're going to kill me and feed me to the birds and the animals, your entire army will be fed to the birds and the animals. And that's exactly what happens. Along the way, they're strewn along the way, and the birds and the animals come. So what does Israel do? It says the sons of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their camps. So where the Philistines had been camped in the valley of Elah, they scattered, they left, they fled there, they left all their stuff there, and Israel went and picked up all the plunder of the Philistine armies. A couple questions and we close. Who's really fighting here? Who is fighting here? Satan and God. This is a war, but a holy war, if you will, between the one true God, Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, our Creator, and Satan and his false god, Dagon, the Philistine god. That's who's fighting here. You have David as Yahweh's man on the ground and Goliath as Satan's man on the ground. That's the scene. That's the picture. Who wins? Yahweh wins every single time. Don't be deceived, mankind. God will not be mocked. It doesn't matter who's doing the mocking. Our God will not be mocked. He won't be taunted. And on this day, He showed His supremacy. Yahweh wins every time, in every place, against every enemy, whether it's a human enemy or a demonic enemy. Yahweh wins always and forever. And the Philistines should have learned that on this day as they see their champion, their Goliath, their giant, felled to the ground and beheaded with his own sword. Oh, I'd like to say more, but we'll stop. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank You